Hello all, A Knife's Tale here, bringing you my second review. And we're going to be looking at today the Civivi Conspirator. I'm sticking with the budget, and well, no, I guess this knife is not a budget, we'll get into that, but I'm sticking with Civivi, mostly because I'm thinking of using this knife as the full-size comparison for future videos, when I pull out comparisons knives for size. So I figured I'd start out with it. I'm going to set the baseline with the basics right out of the gate this time, see how that works, and just say that this is a button lock knife with Gaborsha wood scales. It is a steel liner, deep carry pocket clip, with a, let's see if you can see it there, Nitro V. I'm not sure what to call this blade. It doesn't look like a standard bead blast. It's kind of like an acid wash, maybe? Yeah, it kind of looks like a stone wash, but the color makes me think it's an acid wash of some sort, maybe. This knife has a flipper and the fuller for deployment. And it makes an interesting noise if you think, here, listen to it. It's got a clickiness to it, which is quite nice. Now that we set the stage, let's jump into specs. The reason this knife is good for a full-size knife is that the blade length on this knife is 3.5 inches, which is my kind of right there for full-size knives. Technically, you could argue that if you measure to the plunge line, it is 3 5/8, so we're calling that 3.65-ish. But if you measure to the front of the scale, where most people will probably measure for your blade length, you are at 3.5. So I'm going to use this as a, at least until someone in the comments has a suggestion otherwise, I'm going to use this for the full-size knife comparisons. The overall length is, it looks on camera like a little bit over 8 inches, and it is, but a little bit more than it probably looks. But still shy of 8 1/8, so it's like 8.1. Yeah. The handle length is 4 5/8, almost on the dot. So 4.6-ish. Let us get a weight here. That was my chair. 3.81 ounces. So it is not quite an ounce an inch, if you care about those ratios. But it's pretty close. It's by no means a heavy knife, and by no means a difficult to carry knife. It's also not particularly offensive in the pocket. Get our calipers. 512 thousandths, so it's a little over half an inch. It is thicker than its little sibling, the Elementum, which, you know what, after we're done here, I will make a quick comparison. That is the small knife comparison, as well, at least that's my intention. 118 thousandths, very thin blade stock for a full-size knife. I mean, it's pretty good. Behind the edge on this knife is 16 or 17 thousandths. Yeah, 16.100, yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to go with 16 thousandths, 17 thousandths, somewhere in that line. I have sharpened this knife. There's still a little bit of use on this new edge. It's quite sharp, and even though it's been used since being sharpened, So yours is probably going to be around that 16,000s. Since I mentioned it, we will do a quick comparison to the Elementum. And yeah, this is a much more substantial knife in every way. It is taller, thicker, longer, but it makes a good comparison for small and full-size knives. Not large, full-size. We will see some large. But neither are difficult to carry. They're both quite nice in the pocket. This knife is on bearings, and as I said, is a button lock, and I would like to say that while I'm not a super fan of plunge locks in general, which is, let's see if we can even see that good. Civivi does pretty darn good ones. No play. No problem. I've never had a problem with any Civivi button locks, and I consider them probably the best in the budget category, maybe even the premium category for their Wii lines for button locks. So if you're going to do it, this is a pretty darn good option. There are a couple others that are quite good, but yeah, Civivi's going to probably do you well. Just don't be too rough with button locks in general, because they can disengage if the plunge isn't just right. Fortunately, with the Civivi, you also have the benefit of these being relatively thin blade stocks and thin knives, so they're slicers, but they're also not really meant for harder use things. Anything that really would probably cause it to disengage. This is not your ideal knife for that in the first place, so they kind of build that in as a protective measure as well. The ergos on this knife are wonderful. As you can see, the wood is not contoured, it's flat, but it has a lot of chamfering and it's almost rounded. In fact, I would say part of this chamfer is just a straight round. So with neutral ergos, you can get more than a full four-finger grip, and it's very comfortable. Yes, you feel the pocket clip. It is a budget deep carry clip. You're going to feel it. It is Civivi standard, so get rid of the bill, please. That goes flat here, but beyond that, it's a good clip. Good retention, good functionality, deep carry. Yes, you feel it, but it's not uncomfortable, particularly on these larger knives, or larger than the Elementum knives. It's a little more uncomfortable when it's small. There's jimping up here that does serve a little bit of a purpose. The plunge grind is one of this knive's weaknesses, as it ends right about here. So there's not as much life left on this knife as some Civivis, or just knives in general. It's not terrible, it's not great. As you can see, I sharpened it, and I did, let's see if we can get that glinting. Yeah, I did tap that stone right here, just a little bit. Stop pin is up here, so you, well, it's a flipper. You don't come anywhere near the edge with the stop pin, so you can always cut in your own choil. And this is a thin enough knife that I wouldn't really be too concerned about using up some of that life, because it doesn't really get super thick for quite a while. It slices very well because it has a large drop to a thin edge. It performs great. I can vouch for this one. I've gotten a pretty decent amount of use out of this guy. And it's held up well. I will say that there is some lock stick. That little pop is lock stick. That may or may not be with yours. It may or may not work itself out on yours, or any button lock for that matter. But for budget button locks, I'm going to say I prefer a tiny bit of lock stick, which is what I would consider. This is not bad. It's a pop, but it's hardly making it any more difficult to disengage. I like the little bit of lock stick because it usually means that the plunge lock is gripping on pretty well. And that's what you want. You want that extra level of... Apparently this knife doesn't like my table. You want that extra level of, I guess, protection. It should also be mentioned that this knife, you can reverse the pocket clip on, which is great because button locks are pretty good for being ambidextrous. I'm not left-handed, as you can see. Though I do actually use my left hand quite a bit. Just not always with my knives, so... But it works. It works well. You just gotta actuate with your index finger if you're left-handed, and this knife accommodates that, which is great. There's really no reason for an ambidextrous locking system not to have the holes tapped for left-handed usage. Unless you subscribe to the left-handed people do not exist belief, which... Sure, I guess. There is a lanyard post for anybody who cares. Moving on. This is a good knife. Oh, and they blacked out the Civivi logo. It looks fine, but I kind of like when they have the silver on it. It looks just more finished. So this is a good knife. There's a lot to like on this knife, but it's not quite a budget knife. This knife comes in right around that 80, I think it's like $83. And budget for me sort of ends at the 75 to 80 range. I say 75 to 80 because if you get a knife at 76 and it has all the hallmarks of being a really great budget knife, I'll give it the pass. But over 80, it's not getting the pass. No. But I prefer to see 75 or less for budget. This doesn't quite hit that. And I'm not 100% sure why, because I know Civivi has other offerings in its budget line that are very similar, but do just sneak under. I don't know if it's... What about this knife is causing it to be slightly more expensive? The button lock Elementum or the Chevalier, a lot of button locks, I think, from Civivi fall just under that $75 range. Despite that, this is not exactly far out of the realm of budget, and it's a really good knife. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of competition for it in Civivi's own line. So if you really want to stick to that budget, you have an option. I'm sure you can find numerous options, and you have a lot of knives that offer different styles and different features, and this might be the one for you, might not. It is a really good knife. It has performed. It has held up. Really, there's not much bad to say. I mean, maybe the non-wood version of this, if there's a G10 or something version, might come in under that 75. I'm not sure. I should probably have looked that up before starting, but I didn't, so oh well. You know, I just realized I didn't check the hardware. It's very simple on this one. All the body screws are T8. And like a lot of Civivi pocket clip screws, these are T6, which I don't love, but yeah. If you're left-handed or you want to put out an aftermarket clip, which is like a $10 titanium clip from Amazon or something, you can mess with those, but if that's not something you have to do to flip the clip or swap it, you're not going to have to interact with that. You're only going to have to deal with these 3 screws, the pivot and the 2 body screws, to take this knife apart. It shouldn't be hard. Have good, solid, quality, hard tools, and you'll be fine. And minimal T6 is always appreciated. So aside from that segue, because I forgot something, yeah, I think the value on this knife is pretty good. I don't think it is good enough compared to some competitors, because they do fall in the budget territory. But this feels like a really good knife. It feels substantial in the hand. And it feels solid. It's recommendable. But just a tiny bit overpriced. Maybe not enough for me to say that I wouldn't recommend this knife. It's a good one. And it makes great sounds. I don't know if they all do, but mine certainly does. That's all I have to say about this one, I think. Yes. If you've stuck around, I greatly appreciate it. If you want to like or subscribe, greatly appreciate that too. Leave comments. What's your thoughts on this knife? What's your thoughts on how this knife compares to other Civivi budget knives? Maybe you know what that extra couple dollars in price point is. I'd be interested to find out exactly why this one is slightly higher. Because I feel like they've done very comparable models in the Civivi line and even the more budget-oriented Zencut line that give this one a run for its money. Outpace it just a bit. But in this case, you are getting Nitro V in the wood. Maybe that's just it. I don't know. Thanks for watching, though. We're done here. Bye-bye.